In the previous discussion, we were talking about eudaimonia, this concept that is central in Aristotle's ethics. And eudaimonia is often translated as happiness. But then we saw that Aristotle said something a little shocking. He said that children can't be happy. That is, children cannot experience eudaimonia. And that seems a little shocking because children generally seem to be happier than pretty much everyone else. And what that gets to, what we said in the last discussion, is that when Aristotle's using that term, eudaimonia, which is often translated as happiness, he's talking about something that's really kind of profound, and it has to do with the soul. In fact, that's a phrase that's used in Aristotle's ethics. Happiness is an activity of the soul, right? It's something deep, it's something profound that comes after a long time of effort in life, pursuing excellence in life, in some sort of life endeavor, but also moral excellence, and it's often difficult. And this eudaimonia is this thing that can happen to a person when you look back on your life and you can say, you know, I gave it a real shot. You know, I worked hard at life. Not only did I work hard to succeed in some endeavor in life, but I also worked hard to succeed as a moral person, right? I didn't only want to succeed in terms of, you know, financial success, but I wanted to succeed in terms of moral success. And as I look back on my life, I can see that, yeah, I made some mistakes, but you know, I was always busy at the hard work of life. And we saw that passage from St. Paul where near the end of his life, he says of himself, you know, I have run the race. I have fought the good fight. We notice that the word makarios, used in the New Testament, in the Sermon on the Mount, in that early Christian document, the Gospel of Matthew, the word makarios and eudaimonia are very similar. The way it's translated in Matthew chapter 5 is blessed. And so Jesus is recorded to have said in his Sermon on the Mount, blessed are those who mourn, blessed are the persecuted, right? So that should tell us that when we're talking about eudaimonia, this sense of contentedness of soul, we're talking about something different from what we normally think of as happiness in the 21st century. And then what we did then was we looked at some clips from this film, The Mission, and we saw a couple priests making very difficult decisions, right? And these difficult decisions that they made led to the end of their own lives. So this isn't obviously the stuff of happiness. And we asked the question, because Aristotle says, you know, people, whatever people do, they're doing it because they want to experience eudaimonia. A lot of people get that wrong. A lot of people chase eudaimonia in the wrong way, but everything that people do, they chase it for that reason. Well, if Aristotle's right, then the decision that the two priests we see making decisions in this movie, then they make those decisions because they think that this will bring them some sense of eudaimonia. But it's an extremely difficult situation, and it leads to their death, so how could that possibly be linked to eudaimonia? And I think the answer to that would be that, again, eudaimonia doesn't have to do necessarily or really at all with our conception of having fun, with our conception of being entertained. It has to do with knowing that one has done the right thing. Given the information one has, then you make your decision and you act. And you can look back and say, given the information I had, I did the right thing. And there's a sense of eudaimonia that can come with that, a sense of contentedness of soul that can come with that. And so that was one of the key themes of our last discussion. What I wanted to do now is to actually, you know, go back to those three scenes from that film, The Mission, and relate them to a different topic. And the topic here is, this goes back to discussions we've had previously, and that is related to the idea of the logos, this idea of a moral law. So the Roman emperor here and philosopher Marcus Aurelius said that common to everyone is the reason, or the logos, which makes us rational creatures. So the thing that makes us rational creatures, you know, different from raccoons, different from blue whales, is reason. And reason, Marcus Aurelius says, is the logos. If so, that reason, that is this logos, also is common, which tells us what to do or not to do. And so, one of the things that's going on with the logos, the work of the logos, is to tell us what's right and what's wrong. So the logos is a kind of moral law. And in earlier discussions, we looked at the Egyptian concept of ma'at, which I think is pretty similar to the logos. And remember, in ancient Egypt, the idea was that when you die, your heart is weighed on one side of a scale, the feather, which represents ma'at, is on the other side of the scale, and you want it to balance out. In other words, when you get to judgment, you want to be able to say that in your life you lived up to the requirements of ma'at. All right, ma'at, logos, I think these are pretty similar concepts. And so Aristotle agrees that such a thing as the logos exists. St. Paul agrees that such a thing as the logos exists. And yet it's pretty clear that when it comes to acting on the logos, that you have differences. And that's the question that we want to work with today a little bit. If there is a moral law that exists in the universe, if there is a logos that exists in the universe, and if one of the basic jobs of that logos is to help human beings know what they should and shouldn't do, if it's true that the logos exists, then why is there moral disagreement among people who want to do what the logos requires of them? So we're not talking about, you have a person who's trying to be ethical and a person who's a career criminal. We expect that they're going to disagree. But what happens when you have two people who really are committed to doing what is right, but then a question arises and they differ? Plato says that the enlightened person wants to find a way to live his or her life here on earth without becoming tainted by immoral deeds, and to depart from life confidently and without anger and bitterness. And everyone who wants to do what's right agrees with that. But, you spend enough time living and sort of, dealing with decisions, and what you'll find is that people who equally want to get through life without committing immoral deeds, sometimes they'll disagree about what should be done, how to do what should be done. If there really is a logos out there that can help us to know what's right and what's wrong, why do we have these disagreements, right? Paul says, live as children of the light. Right, find out what pleases the Lord. Okay, so this is obviously a leading early Christian, right? And he's telling people to find out what pleases the Lord. But when we read early Christian literature, the book of Acts, for example, other early Christian literature, we find out that Christians will disagree with each other sometimes about, well, what really pleases the Lord? We don't, there's disagreement. If that moral law is in place, and St. Paul believes there's a moral law, he knows this word logos, he's certainly very aware of this concept, and St. Paul himself writes about this kind of concept, right? So if that exists, why is there disagreement? Why can't everybody just plug into the logos, so to say, and instantly everybody knows what pleases the Lord, to use that language there? Why is there disagreement? And actually we see that Paul himself gets into a disagreement. So this comes from the book of Acts. And here's the passage. Sometimes later, Paul said to Barnabas, let us go back and visit the believers in all the towns where we preach the word of the Lord and see how they are doing. So Paul says, let's go back and visit these places we've been. Barnabas wanted to take John, also called Mark, with them, but Paul did not think it was wise to take him because he, that is John, also called Mark, had deserted them in Pamphylia and had not continued with them in the work. So Paul and Barnabas have a disagreement. They had such a sharp disagreement, the book of Acts says, that they parted company. All right? So here's Paul, who himself will write about a moral law, right? But in this particular matter, there's a disagreement, and they can't find a way to work it out. And so they separate and go their separate ways. It's interesting, Paul says in one of his writings, he says, if it is possible, as far as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone. It's interesting, Paul's saying, insofar as it depends on you, if it is possible, try to live at peace with everyone, right? In other words, the implication here seems to be that, conflict is going to happen. Conflict is kind of a basic part of life. Remember, we were talking about, in an earlier discussion, the human condition, right? People want peace, but there's a lot of non-peace, right? People want peace, but there's a lot of conflict. Like, why? How does that make sense? People want peace, but there's a lot of conflict. That's weird, right? That's part of the human condition. And Paul seems to be recognizing that, there's going to be conflict. But insofar as it depends on you, work really hard to live at peace with others, right? Now again, if you are really trying to make the right decisions and someone else doesn't really care, then we would expect that there'd be differences. But what happens when you have people who equally want to do the right thing, but have differences? Why does that happen? So, to go with Plato's idea of the cave, and here we're touching on a lot of things that have come up in previous discussions. Plato's idea of getting out of the cave, but I think we can realistically say that even if we work really hard to get out of the cave, right, to see the light, to get into the light, that life is still going to throw complications at us, that we can't see very far ahead. And there's that turn coming up in the road. And what's the right thing? And you have two people in the car, and both of them equally want to do the smart thing. One person says, we don't know what's coming up around that corner. Therefore, the smart thing is to turn around and go back. And the other person might respond and say, no, the smarter thing is to keep moving ahead, And you're going to have disagreements. And we remember another thing we've looked at is St. Paul's statement that we see through a glass darkly. We have the quote there, we see only a reflection as in a mirror. Then when we get out of this world, when we get to the next world, then we'll see things clearly. So this is the world of shadows, right? This is the world of seeing through a glass darkly. This is the world of, turns, and we can't see where life is going. And people of goodwill who equally want to do what the Logos requires, who want to do what the moral law requires, they're going to come to differences. And so we're going to see that. Let's go through these three clips in the film again, but with this theme in mind: people who equally want to do the right thing, but they come to different conclusions about what to do. Okay, so the movie is The Mission, and in the first scene, then we have this leader of the church, the leader of the Catholic Church, who comes from Europe. And we won't go into details here about the movie, but this leader says that a mission in South America has to be shut down. That the people of this ethnic group, the Guarani, that they can no longer live in the mission, and that the priests who preside over this mission have to leave. Okay? And so the two key figures we're paying attention to, two priests, Father Gabriel and Father Mendoza, they're given an order, all right, a clear order. The mission will be shut down, and you have to leave tomorrow. Interestingly, they both disobey. Neither will go along with what they are told to do. This isn't said clearly, this isn't said specifically, but it's pretty clear in the film that both of them think there is a higher law. So they're told by the fellow at the top picture there, they're given an order by him. But Father Gabriel and Father Mendoza both see that there's a higher law, all right? A law that's higher than this order that we've been given, and we're going to obey that higher law. And I have it there, remember Antigone, right? We've talked about Antigone before. This order goes out from Creon, no burial rites over the body of Polynices. Antigone says, I hear Creon's law, King Creon, but there's a higher law, the law of Zeus. And it's the law of Zeus that must be obeyed. So she disobeys Creon and pays. Father Gabriel, Father Mendoza obey a higher law. They obey the dictates of the moral law. They obey what they perceive to be the dictates of the Logos, higher than the command that they've been given by this leader who's come to their world from Europe. You see the conflict here. that the Guarani tell this church leader who's come from Europe, who say, we were wrong ever to have trusted you, right? That they express a feeling of betrayal. And Father Mendoza, Father Gabriel are listening to this. And in a touching moment, the leader who's come from Europe says to Father Gabriel, you need to persuade the Guarani not to fight. And Father Gabriel responds, I failed to persuade you to fight on their behalf. Who's going to fight on their behalf? Well, it turns out that both Father Mendoza and Father Gabriel will fight on the behalf of the Guarani, but they're going to do it in very different ways. So Father Gabriel and Father Mendoza actually share broad agreement. They agree that the order they've been given is immoral, that it's a betrayal of the people that will lead to their enslavement. If they obey the order and go, if they leave the Guarani, and then the Portuguese come, then many of those Guarani will be enslaved, right? And to do nothing in the face of that, that is wrong. And so they agree that this order is absolutely immoral, right? And therefore they agree that it would be wrong to obey the order. They seem to agree that, we have an obligation to be faithful to the people we've come to serve. We have an obligation to be loyal to them. We have an obligation to have their well-being at the forefront of our minds. And so there's pretty broad agreement. Well, let's watch this first scene that sets things up.
I said they don't understand what you mean. So they want you to speak more clearly. What is it exactly you want me to do?
They must leave the mission.
Steo hawe panamu behu mung mission emua. They say they don't want to leave the mission. The mission is their home.
They must learn to submit to the will of God. Tell them.
Steo hawe. Ewandam Diego Capesi.
Mai wanda ma pawe moa ove de pikine uhiera kak mission.
Ma pawe ta buhiera mamu mukpoborun mandendem.
They say it was the will of God that they came out of the jungle and built the mission. They don't understand why God has changed his mind.
I cannot hope to understand God's reasons.
Steo hawe Ewandam Diego Capesi.
Ua kapuse wanda ma hukim sim.
He says, how does he know you know God's will?
Mukaka bachirung e wanda ma. Mukaka bachirung portugueses.
He doesn't think you speak for God. He thinks you speak for the Portuguese.
I do not personally speak for God, but I do speak for the church, which is God's instrument on earth.
Steo hawe Yechabehim Ewandamate.
Makan hukal kapiu makan tay mana kawan kasmagan.
He says, why don't you speak to the King of Portugal?
I have spoken to the King of Portugal. He will not listen.
Muka poru. Muka kabang.
He said, he is also a king. He also will not listen.
Tuma kinau ma kawakin. Ma kukaku ma sinti. Your name. Your game.
Says they were wrong ever to have trusted us. They're going to fight.
Well, then you must persuade them not to fight.
I failed to persuade you to fight on their behalf.
If they do fight, it is absolutely imperative that no one of you should even seem to have encouraged them to do so. And therefore all of you will return with me to Asuncion tomorrow. If anyone should disobey this, he will be excommunicated, cut off, cast out.
So we saw that Father Gabriel was very disappointed by this order that came. He was hoping that the mission would be able to stand. And he concludes that he cannot obey this order. He's going to stay. Father Mendoza comes to Father Gabriel. Father Gabriel's the senior priest, and Father Mendoza renounces his vow of obedience because he, realizes I can't obey this order. It's interesting that Father Gabriel is upset by this, but because he himself will disobey. But I think it's disobedience, it's Father Mendoza's disobedience to Father Gabriel. Father Gabriel's going to take a peaceful approach to this. Father Mendoza is going to stand with the Guarani who will fight. Father Mendoza says that the Guarani want to live, right? And if the Portuguese come and enslave them, well, then in a sense, they'll live as slaves, but you can't have a real life like that. They want to live, and I'm going to stand with them. Father Gabriel says, well, if you want to help them live, then help them as a priest. God is love. And I think he is referring here to the sacrifice of Christ, right? That Christ sacrificed himself. Father Gabriel will sacrifice himself. Guarani with Father Gabriel will sacrifice themselves, and they won't fight. So follow the example of Christ, who did not resist with arms, right? But who resisted with self-sacrifice and gave the world that kind of example. Resist that way. You can hear Father Mendoza saying, how is standing by and letting these people be enslaved, how is being passive in the face of this violence, how is that love? Right? It's not hard to see how this debate can work itself out. So let's watch this scene.
I want to renounce my vows of obedience.
Get out.
I want to explain.
Get out, Rodrigo. I won't listen to you. Just you?
No, it's Ralph and John, too.
What do you want, Captain? An honorable death?
They want to live, Father. They say that God has left them. He's deserted them. Has he?
You should never become a priest.
But I am a priest, and they need me.
Then help them as a priest. If you die with blood on your hands, Rodrigo, you betray everything we've done. You promised your life to God, and God is love.
So now in the third scene, Father Mendoza comes to Father Gabriel and asks for Father Gabriel's blessing. Father Gabriel says, I can't bless you. If you're right, then you'll have God's blessing. If you're wrong, my blessing can't help you. All right. And then Father Gabriel says this, if might is right, then love has no place in the world. I don't have the strength to live in that kind of world. So Father Gabriel is a principled pacifist, we might say. He's a person who really does not believe that the answer to violence is violence. And there's a certain logic there, because violence leads to violence, which leads to violence, which leads to violence. You can, that makes some sense. So he's a principled pacifist. You can hear Father Mendoza responding, though. We've already said this, standing by and letting these people be enslaved. That's not love, right? Not resisting the kind of evil that's coming their way. That's not love. And so that's the question. The Logos demands love for other people. But what's the right response? And so you get this different response. And then in the photo below, Father Gabriel gives Father Mendoza his cross. And I think we have this moment where they both recognize that the other is taking a principled stand. I think they recognize that, Mendoza recognizes in Gabriel, Gabriel recognizes in Mendoza that they're taking a principled stand. Okay, let's watch that scene.
Father, I've come to ask you to bless me.
No. If you're right, you'll have God's blessing. If you're wrong, my blessing won't mean anything. If might is right, then love has no place in the world. Maybe so, maybe so. But I don't have the strength to live in a world like that, Rodrigo. I can't bless you. Rodrigo.
So the end of the film is very powerful. Both priests, neither priest survives. Father Mendoza does fight. Father Gabriel does resist passively. Their end is the same, and it's I think quite powerful actually, as Father Mendoza, watches what happens to Father Gabriel. And so this is a tragic end. It's a tragedy for everyone. It's a tragedy for the Guarani. It's a tragedy for these priests. It's a tragedy for the Portuguese, who will come or who have come and inflicted this harm on others. Everybody loses. Everybody loses in this situation. And so that's why, it's inspiring to have these examples of Father Mendoza, Father Gabriel, who resisted this evil that was coming their way. Questions we can ask: is it moral to do something one knows will lead to the triumph of evil? This might be what Father Mendoza asks. To be passive when this wave of violence is coming our way, is that really moral? Because being passive will lead to the triumph of evil. Whereas if we fight, perhaps we can roll it back. You could hear Father Mendoza making that point. You could hear Father Gabriel responding, is it moral to meet one form of evil with another form of evil? Now this would be, I think, what a principled pacifist would say, that all acts of violence, such as we see in this film, all such acts are a kind of evil. And these Portuguese soldiers that you, Father Mendoza, and the Guarani fighting with you, these soldiers you're fighting, they have families of their own. And after you kill some of them, those families back in Europe will be without a father. Those parents will be without a son. So it's a complicated situation, and I'm not sure. As I said in the previous discussion, I understand both points of view. I don't really argue with either point of view in this circumstance. And I think actually that they kind of complement one another. I think together they kind of make a complete response to what's coming at them. And so this is an example of how people who really want to do the right thing can come to very different conclusions. And you might agree more with Father Gabriel, you might agree more with Father Mendoza, but I hope that all of us can see that that both did what they thought was right. And so the last thought then is we can relate this to the concept of judgment, something that we've discussed before. And we've mentioned this, the Egyptian Book of the Dead, there you have that situation where your heart is on one side of a scale, the feather representing Ma is on the other side, and you want it to balance out, right? Judgment. We've looked in previous discussions at passages from the New Testament which discuss judgment. That people are judged on the other side. After this life, there's judgment. You see that passage below, and the books were opened, another book was opened, which is the book of life, and the dead were judged out of those things that were written in the books according to their works. And so the idea of judgment. And when these kinds of moral conflicts come up, I think it might be useful to say, what am I willing to be held accountable for? All right? So Father Mendoza, who says I'm going to take up arms, along with the Guarani who take up arms to resist, I think that's the right thing to do. Not an easy thing to do, not what I want to do, but what I should do. And this is what I'm willing to be accountable for on Judgment Day. I'm willing to be accountable for this. I'm going to make this decision, and I'm willing to be accountable for it. And we can conceive of Father Gabriel doing the same. This is the approach I think I should take. It's different from Father Mendoza's. But Father Mendoza has his conscience. I have mine. And although we have broad agreement, we disagree on how to respond. So this is the position I'm going to take. This is the way I'm going to go. And this is what I'm willing to be accountable for in the next world. So this is pretty heavy stuff, right? But getting moral decisions right, it's often easy. Often it's pretty clear what's right and what's wrong. But sometimes life throws decisions at us that are hard. It's not clear. Remember that image we looked at, the turn is coming, but you don't know it's on the other side of that turn. That's how life is a lot of the times, and a lot of times we don't know what's coming. And so we have to do the best we can. And we want to be wise. And we want to practice prudence every day, right? We want to practice prudence every day. Get good at that, so that when the big decisions come, we can make the best decisions possible.